Okay, welcome everyone. So today we are going to discuss this naming chapter for Clean Code book. So this time I am thinking of a little bit different format. So this chapter, right? This is about like when you're writing code, how you should be naming things, right? And the author is saying that everywhere, like naming classes, naming function, naming variable, your modules, everywhere you have to use names, right? So names are very important. So a lot of these things will feel intuitive to you guys because we have been writing code, right? So let's do this thing. So these are some of the headings that the book had, and then the author explained these topics. So let's go through them one by one. So the plan this time is, so each of the additional information about each of these topics is hidden, right? So we'll start by first topic. I'll start a stopwatch of 7 seconds. If anyone want to guess or if anyone wants to talk about what's the meaning of that, they can go ahead. Else after 7 seconds, then I'll open this up and then we can discuss what is the meaning of that topic, right? Cool. Does that sound fine? Any questions?
Just to be clear, this is the same book by Robert C. Martin, right? The Clean Code.
Yeah, clean
Okay.
code. Yeah. And this is chapter 2, naming.
Okay.
Okay. Uh, yeah. Okay. So let's begin. So the first thing which the author wants to say regarding naming is use intention revealing names. So let me start. And if anyone wants to tell what this means, go ahead. Else then we'll open this up.
It should make the intention clear of using that name or variable.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like it should be intuitive.
Intuitive. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So basically, like we can understand this with a simple example, right? So let's say if I have to store number of days, right? I could name a variable d, right? But if someone is reading the code, they might not understand the meaning of d. So instead, what we could have used is elapsed time in days, days since creation, days since modification, right? Which actually reveals what the variable is storing. Okay, let's see one more example. So this one, so basically someone wanted to write some code to get the number of flagged cells from a matrix. So there was a matrix, which is a board, and it has some values of cells. And we want to return all the cells which have some particular flag value, right? So this was one of the code that was written. So this is that matrix. So he created the list, and then every uh, every element in the board which has value 4, he added that to this list one and returned it, right? So how could we improve this code? Like how could we use this concept of intention revealing names to improve this code?
Well, if the list represents a board, then maybe it could be like board
Mhm.
1.
Board. Okay, and you said it should be board 1.
Just because he has list 1, maybe there are multiple game boards. I don't know.
Okay, yeah. No, like simple. It's only one board, right? So we can keep it board then. Okay. So there's only one board, and we have to. This function is only returning the cells in that board. And there might be multiple boards, but this function does not care about it. This function only cares about that you give me a board, whatever board you have, and I will just give you the flagged numbers in that board, right?
Mhm.
So that's one. What else? So then this will become, instead of the list, it will become board, right? Okay, now the
And
code seems more clear. What else?
like X can be the cell instead of just X.
Okay, yeah, definitely, because it represents a cell. So cell And what else?
And list, what is list one? We are
So
okay.
yeah, we are returning all the cells which are flagged.
We can
So
name it as flagged cells.
yeah, exactly. We can name it flagged cells. Flagged cells, right? Cell of 0, then what else can we do?
I think that's it, right?
Get them sounds kind of it could probably go back to the first rule,
Oh, get them.
like maybe you're getting state or get flagged or something
Yep.
like that.
Yeah, get flagged cells. Uh, and there's one more thing. So this 4, maybe like this 4 represents that flag value, right? So like if I'm reading the code, I does not understand the meaning of 4. So maybe I can like create a static variable or something which tells that this is a flagged flag marker, and then which is equal to 4. And then later if it changes, then I don't have to worry about it. And then if the cell value is flag marker, then right. So yeah, so it will look something like this: get flagged cells, game board, right? And then these are the flagged cells which are returned. So from the game board, if the status value is flagged, then I will add a return, right? So now like you don't need to read the comments or anything. Like you yourself looking at this code can understand what it means. Okay, so should we move on to next topic?
Sure.
Okay, so this one is avoid disinformation.
Maybe that's like the number 4 instead of, like enumeration name from last example.
Mm-hmm. So number 4 instead of using the flag marker, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not disinformation, but it's like magic number.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as bad as like bad names, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, you're right. So disinformation is like basically you are having some wrong naming, like which does not actually mean so. And it might be very common. So the author has given this example. So let's say if you have a group of accounts, right? And if you are naming that variable account list, that is disinformation, because account list means that that variable might be a list, right? And maybe it's not list or it's something else. It just represent group of accounts, right? So if the variable is not of list type and you are naming it account list to represent group of accounts, then it's a disinformation. Then maybe you should name it account group or accounts, right?
Mhm. That's actually a funny example, because if the user thinks that it's a list, like as
Yeah.
the we think of lists as a data structure, but maybe they think of it as like a list of accounts. So
Yeah.
sometimes I wonder, yeah, I mean, it's funny.
Yeah. So yeah, and you will see like with this naming topic, there might be different people might have different perspectives, right? So definitely, yeah, like but yeah, and in the starting of this book, the author has mentioned that like these are my suggestions, but yeah, definitely someone else could have. So you're right. So someone could clearly understand account list with the name that it's a group of accounts, and he might not care about if it's a list or not. But generally as programmers, list is generally a data type. So this confuses us with the data type, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I'll move to the third one. Make meaningful distinctions. Don't give different name just to satisfy compiler. This mistake, I think we all do a lot.
There used to be a naming convention, like integers might be like I count, like double might be like D count.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's, I think that it used to be a popular practice, but now it's bad. I don't know if it has, maybe it's
Yeah.
irrelevant to this rule.
Yeah, so that thing that you are saying, it will be covered in one of the rules below. That is one of the rule, and yeah, it says that you should not use the data types in the names probably, because these days your IDs are smart enough, right? But this is what basically this is saying, is that a lot of times if we want to distinct, right, just to satisfy the compiler, we give them A1, A2 name, right? Without actually uh, giving them a distinct name to actually differentiate between what does A1 and A2 means, right? So one of the examples can be seen in this code, right? So let's say there was someone has to write code to copy characters, right? From A1 to, like, from one list to another list. You have to copy character from one list to another list. So what is the problem that you see with this code?
It's easy to confuse 1 and 2. Like if you had like source versus target, it might be more meaningful.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the point.
Or from to, something like that.
Yeah, from to. Yeah, exactly. Source, destination, and things like that. Right. And like some other examples is that sometimes people, like, they have to, because the compiler should have different name, they will name variable customer info and customer, right? And if you're looking at code, you don't understand what is the meaning difference between customer info and customer, right? So don't use these kind of naming distinctions just to satisfy the compiler. Like, think a little bit about it. What's the difference between these two variables, and then name them accordingly. Okay. The next one is use pronounceable names. So why do you guys think this is important?
Because
Sometimes we go
Describes
ahead.
the I mean, pronoun is like this, what noun does, right? I mean, describing the behavior of a noun.
I
Something like.
Did you say pronouns and nouns?
Yeah, I was saying like pronoun is by basic definition what it is. It describes the nature of a noun, right? So whatever variables you are using, it might be describing the.
think it's more like how we tell about it, like how we explain it.
Yeah,
Uh,
some inner.
like as per my understanding, like pronouns is not related to noun probably, but pronouns is something which you are able to easily speak, right? So as an example, uh, let's say if you wanted to store generation, date, year, month, right? So if I'm naming it like this, right? Gen, year, month, D, HMS. So now if I have to, like, if you have to speak out this variable name, it's very difficult for me, right? Gen, YMD, HMS, right? Very difficult. Whereas if I name it like this, generation timestamp, it's so easy to speak this term, right? So basically the author is saying that human brains easily catch words that are easy to speak. So that's why when you're reading the code, or if you're talking about code with your teammates, like it will be very easy to talk about it and explain it if you are using the variable names which are pronounceable.
There's a typo with generation, by the way. It's not a big
Oh,
deal, but
Yeah, so generation data. Yeah, thanks. Cool. Okay. So moving on to this part, use searchable names. So can someone give example of how we can do mistake here and what will be the problem?
I've heard of people using special characters for, like, if you were Chinese, you might be using like Unicode variable names, but that's not a probably, if your code base is large, you don't want to have weird characters. It makes life hard, maybe. I don't know.
Is it possible to use variable names as some other I don't know about
You
it.
can. In like modern languages, they support
Okay.
Unicode, but it's not a good idea, even if, because I think keeping it like simple, it's like the last rule, kind of, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So that is also a good point, right? That using names which are in some other language which might not be easily searchable, like other common, like which you will see very often, right? So let's say if my variable name is E, right? If I'm storing something with E, and now if I in my here, if I'm searching for E, look at how many matches I'm getting, right? So I won't be able to search for it, and it's very hard for me to rename and just do all those things, right? So that's what he means by like having that distinct name, which is like very easy to search, replace, and do all those things, right? I don't know now how will this thing go away. Okay, I don't know what.
You can search another string.
Yeah, which it will not find. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So right. So this is the point over here, that use only like using these kind of names which will have multiple matches. Okay. Avoid encodings.
I think like ASCII text is sometimes you get like weird text files, like even with like when between operating systems, you have to change the encoding because the carriage returns, like the line breaks, the encodings cause problems for your editor, I think.
Yeah, but like I don't know how to avoid that problem. So like one of the issues that you will see is that basically there is this LF line feed, and then there is CRLF, carriage return line feed. So I think Linux uses LF line feed to store enter, which is next character, and Windows store CRLF, which is carriage return line feed to store the value of enter. So the thing here is, like, to your point, that you should be consistent in your code base, that everywhere, if your code base has decided to use LF, it should be using LF at all the places if it is CRLF. And basically at the check-in time, you should write these validations that if some developer by mistake has used some other encoding to store that, then he should replace it. And at least in our code base, like we will get the warning if we check code like that.
What is LF and CRLF? Can you like explain?
So it's like this enter, right? In a code editor, basically the enter is a Unicode character, right? Enter will also be, the computer will also be understanding enter as some Unicode character. And like in some places it's /n, right? So /n is stored as enter, right? So some in Linux, generally entered is stored as LF. We can look up what is the exact Unicode value of LF. So let's see. LF value.
The convention is different for between Windows and Linux
Yeah.
for
So
the line return.
yeah, so new line LF versus CRLF. Sorry. Yeah, so carriage return, its ASCII value is 13/r and line feed is 10/n. So in Windows, like if you want to store a new line, you have to store it as both CR and LF. Whereas in Linux, only LF is only required, right? So basically, any code editor that you are choosing, you can specify in the settings of the code editor that what value of enter should it store when you're writing code. If you set it as CRLF, then your text editor will always store it as CRLF. If it is LF, then it will always store as LF. But if some other developers have some different settings in their code editor, then those line feed might be stored differently. So that's what you have to be careful about.
So what is the best practice here?
Being consistent, like either choose LF or CR, but being consistent, and then like writing these validation during check-in that if the code is not according to the convention that your repository has chosen, then give him a warning that change all the line feeds. And then basically you can run a script or something to change all of your enter values to whatever you want.
Okay.
Right. So here author meant little bit different. So it is basically like encoding like this kind of thing. So first, like what we were talking about, that if it is an integer, then we are storing variable name as starting with I, right? And then if it's let's say if it is a float, we are starting with f underscore, right? So he says avoid that kind of thing. So that is called Hungarian notation, where naming involves type. So L account name means that it's a long account name, right? So he says avoid this kind of Hungarian notation and just use account names. Because in modern languages, compiler remember and enforce type, hence type encoding is not needed. Then another thing which we will see is that basically whatever are the class variables, right? Lot of people prefix them with M underscore, meaning these are member variables of that class. So he's saying that should also be avoided. The class and function should be small enough, and this kind of thing should be avoided. Then similarly in interfaces, like we have seen a lot of times that we name interfaces with I, right? Prefixing it with I. So the recommendation also here is that basically whoever is using your shape factory, he is using it as factory. So you should not tell him about the implementation that it is interface or something. He should just take it and use it. So you don't need to tell him the data type of it. So you don't need to encode I, like the language or something that can figure out what is the data type. So you don't need to encode I for interfaces.
Actually, I'm not following this encodings part at all. Like,
okay, so the thing which we discussed, CRLF and LF was like a different thing, which was not mentioned in book. Basically, that topic came up, so I brought that up. But what in book, encoding means that you are like adding some information, right, to something. So here, what he's saying is, so let's say if I have to store a variable, that means account name, and that variable type is long, right? So like, let me bring notepad. So if it's a long data type and it represents account name, right? So I should not name it L account name. I should just name it account name. If I'm using L account name, I'm encoding the data type and the name of the variable in one name, right? So he's saying you don't need to encode this data type, because basically whatever code editor you will be using, it will be smart enough. You can hover over or do anything to find the data type of account name, right? So you don't need to encode it and make your variable name bigger.
Okay, okay. When you say encoded, just don't mention it as L account name. Keep it as account name.
Account name, yeah. So like here, like basically this encoding word is a bit overloaded. It has a lot of meanings. So that's why maybe you are confused.
Yeah.
But here it has very simple meaning, that basically if you are adding the data type in the variable name, then you should not do that. So that's what it means. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So this one, avoid variable names that require mental mapping. Okay, let's open this up. So basically, like at some places we write names where like actually you have to think about, and it actually maps to something else. So like in loops, you will see, right, that we use ijk, right? And basically ijk maps to the iteration of like, this index, right? So generally in an array, I would mean index, right? And that's why name it I. So here, because it is so common to use I as a loop iteration, it is okay. But like at a lot of places, you might need like more mental mapping to understand it. So for example, if it's a matrix, and it's a 2D matrix, right? And if I have the like first index as I and second index as j, right? Then I need additional mental mapping in my mind that I represents row and j represents column, right? So if I'm using loop like this ij, right? So now if I'm writing for loop, to understand the name of this variable, I need to, inside my mind, I need to map that I represents row and j represent column, right? Which is hard for me, right? So I'm reading this code, my mind will be doing additional mental processing, which will be hard for me to actually to understand the logic, because I have taken some part of my mind to use in the mental mapping. So that's why what author is saying, that try to avoid those kind of names which needs additional mental mapping, and basically name it either R or C, which represent row or column, or maybe row and column, right? So that you don't need additional mental mapping. Okay, so now we are coming back to the topic of nouns. Someone mentioned about nouns, right? So we will see coming back to that. Okay, so any advices on when naming class? How should we name the classes?
It should be relevant to what it stores or what function methods it has.
Yeah, right. Uh, that's important point. But like, I think this term relevant, it applies to everything. Like everything should be relevant. Like what like author wants to add here is that classes name should be noun or noun phrase, right? So like example, customer, wiki page, account password, right? And then like we often name some of the classes like manager, processor, right? But he's saying try to avoid those kind of names because these are confusing, like they're very generic and they don't exactly tell what is the meaning of class. So yeah. So if class names should be noun, what should be method names?
Verbs.
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly. Yeah. So method name should be verbs, right? Because methods are basically doing some action. So like, for example, this post payment, right? It's a verb. Delete page, save. Then accessor, mutators, and predicates should be named for their value and prefixed with get, set, and is. So to identify, so does everyone know what is the meaning of accessor, mutator, and predicates?
The first one is like maybe a getter.
Yep, exactly.
And then mutators might be setters.
Perfect, yeah.
I don't know. Predicate might have to do with conditional, but I don't know.
Predicate means something which checks if a condition is true or not. Like is
Yep.
sorted means it is the value sorted or not. It checks.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Yeah. So that's why accessor should be prefixed with get, right? Mutator should be prefixed with set, and predicates because they state or affirm something, so they should be prefixed with is.
Hey, can you say it again? I lost you. Sorry.
Uh,
The accessor, mutator, and predicates.
okay, so the meaning, right?
I mean, I got this point that it should be a verb because we are doing some action. After that,
So method names should be verbs, right? So there are three special kind of methods which we use a lot. So accessor is a method that allows you to get the value of a private variable. So in a class, if you have a private variable, then you write a accessor method to get its value, right? So now it's a method. Accessor is a method, but it's a special kind of method which is used as an accessor to get the value. So that's why the author is saying, so these accessor special kind of methods, it's good to prefix them with get, and then whatever is the thing that they're returning, right? Because when you're writing get, it basically means it's a verb. Now get name, right? If I'm saying naming it get name, so it is giving me the value of the private variable name. So now see, it looks like as a verb also, and it satisfies the property of accessor that it should start with get, right? So similarly for set and similarly for is.
what is predicates and is?
So predicate, yeah.
Like
so
some
it
determined condition if it is true or false.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, so that's really good. Like keep interrupting and adding points and asking questions. Okay, so moving on to this part. Don't be cute.
Be rude.
No, it does not mean don't be rude. That be rude, but yeah, I mean, you'll see like people write. Yes, so sometimes we try to put our sense of humor in the code, and that's what it means. So, like you'll see examples, right? So, if your function is doing delete items, like you are, let's say, in fun mood today, and you are naming it as holy hand grenade, like it's kind of a grenade which is deleting everything, right? So, yeah, it's funny and it's good sense of humor, but it might confuse a lot of people, and those who don't understand the meaning of this phrase, it's a problem for them. So name simply delete items, right? Similarly, if your function is doing a kill kind of operation, name it kill instead of back.
Yeah, I have seen some part of the code like this. I don't know method. That method is was returning some odd things. Like this is the worst method or something.
Yeah.
This is too complex. Like one method name was the complex method. Avoid that.
Yeah. So yeah, those kind of things. Okay. Pick one word per concept. Okay. So like, let's say basically you have a solution, right, which has bunch of classes, and in those classes, let's say you want to get some value. So in, let's say in that solution, in one class, to get the value, if you have named fetch, right, in another class you're using retrieve, and in another class you're using get. So like basically your intent was same in all the three classes, but you did not choose the same convention, you named things differently, right? So that will be super confusing for your users and other person, that what to expect, right, when getting the value, right? Would it be fetch, retrieve, or get? So that's what he means by picking one word per concept. And then similarly, like controller, manager, driver, they all like seem very similar. So like having different names just to distinguish will also confuse, right? So like looking at these, I don't know what's the difference between these three. So if a solution has a controller, manager, driver, I have no way to know that what's the difference between these three. So okay. So don't pun.
Oh, it's confusing to use confusing words.
Yeah. So what's the meaning of pun?
It's like kind of like a almost like a cute naming thing.
Double meaning words or nicknames, something describing the nature.
Yeah. Like as far as I understand, so pun means that like same sentence, it has two intents, right? And it could be either used as this. So like he's saying that avoid using same word for two purposes, and so using the same term for different idea. So yeah, this is the meaning of pun. Using the same term for different idea is essentially a pun, right? So like we can understand this with one example, and basically it actually little bit, like if you blindly follow this rule, then you might introduce puns. So that's why the author want to distinguish between not blindly following this rule. So let's say I have this method add in my class, right? Where I'm adding two values, right? And now in one of my other class, I want to create a function which basically inserts a number to the list, right? So I will give it a list and a number, and then it will insert it to the list. So like I might be tempted to use word add, right? Because we were saying that pick one word per concept. But like basically you are not adding here, you are either inserting or appending to that list. So use the appropriate word, then name the function as insert or append instead of add, right? Because the meaning of add is that basically generally you are adding two values and then maybe creating a new value. Whereas here you are taking one thing and then putting it inside other thing, right? So it's more of an insert rather than add. Any questions? Okay. Use solution domain names. So use solution domain names. By this, author is saying that basically, like it's okay to use computer science terms, algorithms, pattern names, because your code will be read by other programmers, right? So like for example, the name account visitor makes sense because you are using visitor pattern, right? So this, like, I mean, someone could think of that not to use this word visitor because, but basically mostly everyone knows about visitor pattern, right? So it's okay to use that name. So similarly, using job queue is totally fine. Use problem domain names.
Domain names. Maybe instead of using computer science terms, you can use maybe the business problem. Like if it's accounting software, probably they understand like debit, credit, and other accounting.
Yep, perfect. You are totally on point. Yeah, that's what it means, that like whatever problem space you are using, so you can use those, and you gave a perfect example. So yeah, I don't need to add to this. Okay. Then add meaningful context. So yeah, so at some places, like maybe it's important to add meaningful context, otherwise we won't understand what's the meaning of that variable. So for example, if I'm using state as a variable, right? State has so many meanings, right? Is it like that state machine state, or it is address, like in an address there is a state, right? So what is the meaning of state variable? So he's saying in those kind of situations it's good to add the meaningful context, that basically you are talking about address state, right? So this is what he means. And then also, like if you are basically putting your classes and functions in proper namespace, classes and function, then basically looking at the hierarchy also, it's easy for someone to understand, right? So creating that proper hierarchy, like having that proper namespace name, so that you understand that in this namespace context, this variable would mean this thing, right? So that is also adding a meaningful context to your overall code, which helps understand the meaning of those variables. Cool. Okay. Last thing, don't add gratuitous context. So the meaning of this word is done without good reason. Yeah, so like again, like here we saw, right? He explained this pick one word, and then he said like, don't overdo this pick one word thing where you are creating actually puns. So similarly, here he's saying add meaningful context, but don't overdo it where you are just adding context everywhere. So that, so basically like if you are application, let's say if you have imaginary application gas status deluxe, right? Sorry, gas station deluxe, then it would be bad idea that in every class name you are just prefixing with GST, 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 right? Basically, you could have just chosen that namespace be gas station deluxe, and then your class, every class don't need this prefix GST, right? And then avoiding, and like you will see like another problem is that if you are prefixing everything with GST, then your IntelliSense, you will also have problems with IntelliSense, because now if I start typing my class name with GST, I will get so many suggestions because everything starts with GST. Whereas like if they don't start with GST, if I want to create a class of account or something, I just press A and I will get that term, right? So that's why like in these situations, you should avoid adding context to everything. And cool. Okay. That was it for today's session.
Thank you.